Good afternoon. I'm Rabbi Belovski from the Goldsgreen Synagogue, and it's my great pleasure to present the third and final installment of my series for the 3 weeks. As you probably know, we are just a few days from the end of the 3 weeks, the culmination of which will be Tisha B'Av, the fast of the 9th of Av, which will be on Sunday this year. And as we are in the last of these sessions and we're so close to Tisha B'Av, I've elected to use this final session to talk with you about the Talmud's account of the destruction of the temple. Now, a little word about this before we look at some of the text. The text, in its long form, appears in the 5th chapter of the Talmudic tractate Gittin, which deals primarily with divorce. It's extremely long, occupying several extremely large Talmudic pages. It's a text that I teach every year in full. For those who are interested, it will be taught at Goldsgreen Synagogue on Sunday morning, starting at approximately 10 o'clock and lasts for about 2 hours. And that means that in the time we have today, we can only cover approximately a quarter of the text, if that. Just a thought as to why it may appear in Gittin, dealing with divorce. The great Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen, one of the intellectuals of late 19th century Eastern Europe, was of the view that non-halachic material that appears in the Talmud doesn't just appear randomly. It's not just a stream of consciousness, although there is that, but also because there is some thematic relationship between the primary subject of the tractate and the Agadah, the non-halachic material itself. And this one's quite easy to spot. The story of the destruction of the temple is about the divorce between God and the Jewish people. It's about exploring a relationship that was successful, that was functional, that enabled the Jewish people to be at their best in the Promised Land. And through a series of errors, mishaps, individual and communal, things went terribly wrong first up in the First Temple era and then again the Second Temple era. It's a kind of divorce between God and the Jewish people, although as we will see, it's a temporary one. With that, let's begin. You have here the source sheet, and as before, I will highlight, if I can, the parts that we're reading. So we're going to begin here with the first source. This is an introduction, and it's all really from one very long section in the tractate Gittin, and I've culled it heavily to fit it into the time and to select the parts of interest. I'm going to read the first couple of lines, which introduces it, and then I'm going to skip to the introduction to the story of the destruction itself. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, Maidich Siv. What does the verse mean? And this was a classic introduction to a drosha, to a homily. You find a verse and use the verse as a springboard for an idea that you want to share with your audience, either in a verbal presentation or in writing. What do you make of the verse in the 28th chapter of Proverbs? Ashrei Odom Mefached Tomid. Happy is the person who is always fearful. But someone who hardens his heart will fall into evil. That's the verse, and that's the platform. This is the most famous of all the stories. We're not going to start it, but I will tell you what it's about. Jerusalem was destroyed because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. These were two men with very similar, extremely strange names. They're probably nicknames rather than actual names. And there was a wealthy man who hosted a feast, and he had a close friend by one name, but the other person with a similar name whom he hated was invited in error, and there was a sequence of events which led eventually to Bar Kamsa informing on the Roman authorities. That cites our story in the late 60s of the Common Era, a few years before the destruction of the temple by the Romans in the year 70. The Romans are occupying the land of Israel, and the relationship between the Jewish community and the Roman occupiers is very, very fragile and likely to be ignited at any time. So Kamsa and Bar Kamsa caused the destruction of Jerusalem. Atar Nagoyla v'Tar Nagolto, concerning a rooster and a hen, Chorov Tur Malka. Tur Malka, probably Herodian, which is not far from Jerusalem, was destroyed. And Asakta Rispak, Chorov Beitar. Beitar, this is now moving to the period of the Bar Kokhba revolt, some 60 years after the destruction of the temple. That's in the 130s. The Beitar, the destruction came about through a story associated with what I just translate as a broken sedan chair. Now, we're not going to look at Bar Kamsa or the sedan chair, but we are going to look at what happens after the Bar Kamsa story. After Bar Kamsa goes and he informs on the authorities, the Romans are convinced that the Jews are rebelling against them. Shada alavai and Nir and Kisar. So I've translated it in sections. Translation will not be exactly as I'm saying. I'm reading as I go along, but I hope it's useful for those who prefer to read it in English. So the Roman authorities sent Nero. Now, Caesar here does not mean the emperor, although it's obviously the same word as Caesar. It means the general. It means the person who would be in control of the vassal state of the land of Israel under the Roman emperor, a very, very senior official, Nero. And when Nero came, Shodagira le Mizrach, he fired an arrow to the east, Osanofa Yerushalayim, and it fell towards Jerusalem. Lamarov, he fired an arrow to the west, Osanofa Yerushalayim, it fell in or towards Jerusalem. La'arba Ruchas Hashamayim, so he fired arrows in all directions, Osanofa Yerushalayim, they fell towards Jerusalem. And this is a world of superstition where events of this sort are read not as odd coincidences, but as omens or portents of something to come. So he tried something different, which was common in those times. It appears in the rabbinic literature in other places, and it's known in other cultures. You would pick a child, and you'd say to the child, what are you learning in school? And you would see that if there was some connection between this and current events, that would be seen as a portent of something positive or most likely bad. So Omeleli Yanuka, he said to a child, Posukli Psukho, tell me which verse you're learning. Omele, the boy, said to him, and he quoted, he was learning a verse in the 25th chapter of the book of Ezekiel. I will set my revenge, God speaking through the prophet, Be'edoim, in Edom. Edom is understood by the rabbinic literature to be the poetic or biblical name for Rome. Biyad Ami Yisrael, by the hand of my people Israel. And he was terrified by this Nero. So he remarked, God wishes to destroy his house, i.e. the Jewish people have sinned, but he wants to use me as an instrument for the destruction. And he wants to cleanse his hands, wash his hands as it were, with this man. That's a euphemism, and what it means is he wants to atone, he wants to sort of, as it were, keep his hands clean by using me as the instrument for destruction, and he doesn't want to play. So this first part of the story ends unsuccessfully. Orak, he ran away, for Ozul V'Aige, he ran away, and he converted the Nofat Mine Rebbe Meir. And as an aside, the Gemara says, and Rebbe Meir, the great Tana Mishnaic sage, was descended from him. Now, then there's a long passage which talks about the resources in Jerusalem. A new general called Vespasian came when Nero disappeared, and Vespasian besieges the city. And the city has many resources. There are wealthy men in the city, and there are storehouses of food and fuel which could last for 20 years. But there were a group of people called Biryonim, hotheads, you might call them fanatics, extremists, who are not willing to sit out the siege and wait for the Romans to get bored and go away. Instead, they wanted to fight. So the Talmud records that they burnt the storehouses, which created a famine and therefore a desperate situation. And that's where we pick up our story with our second excerpt. Abba Sikra, Rosh B'Riyah Yerushalayim, Ba'achsi de Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai Hava. The other piece of information you need is that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the famous Mishnaic sage, quoted in many, many places, and a man who devoted his life to creating enactments that kept alive temple practice. Abba Sikra was the head of the faction of the Biryonim, the people who had burnt the storehouses to precipitate a conflict. And he was the nephew of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was the head rabbi. Sholach Lei. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai sent him a message, Tob at Sin Lagabe, come and see me in private. Let's have a private, confidential meeting. Also, and he came. Omalei. So he said to him, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to his nephew, Ad amos avidasu hochi, how long will you continue to behave like this? Vakatalisu leila alma bakafno, and destroy, kill the world, kill all your people with famine. You fool for burning the stores. Amalei ma'i ovid, what can I do? De'i amina lahu midi katluli. If I say even a word to them, they will kill me. And this is one of the great conundrums which has always beset fanatics. You begin to lead an extremist cult, and you realize you need to compromise, but you're now a hostage to the extremists in your own group who will kill you if you make any compromise. Omile, but he said to him, Chazi li tekanta ledidi ipuk, efshut ahaviat solaporto. Can you see, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says to his nephew, any solution? Maybe there's some way I can get out of the city. The Romans are besieging the city and the Jews are inside. Maybe we can effect some kind of at least minimal salvation. Amalei. So Abba Sikra said to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, I've got a plan. And this is one of the most famous stories in the entire Talmud. Pretend you're sick. When you've got to make it credible, so you've got to get people to come and inquire about your well-being, i.e. pay house visits, so people believe the idea that you're desperately ill, and bring something which is rotten to put next to you, meaning we're going to pretend that you've died, and then pass the message around, spread a rumor that you've died. And make sure that when your body is carried out the city, of course, the aside is, as you probably realize, the burial grounds are outside the city. They're going to have to carry the body and get a special exit permit to carry Yochanan ben Zakkai's body from Jerusalem through the gates into the cemetery. But you need to make sure that you post your students next to you, and not to have anyone next to you else other people who are not in on this ruse. Why? So people shouldn't notice that you are light. What he means is that since he's going alive, the body tone is different, and anyone who believes him to be dead will be suspicious. Why? In Huyadi, because it literally means a living person is lighter than a dead person, but it means that they're easier to carry because there is muscle tone, there's no rigor mortis. Ovid Hochi, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, followed his nephew's advice, Nichnas bo Rabbi Eliezer mitzad echad, Rabbi Yeshua mitzad acher, and he posted Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, his trusted servants, one on each side. When they came to the gate, they were suspicious and they wanted to run through. With a sword at the coffin to check that he was definitely dead. Omelo, he said to them, Yomru, Rab and Doc, do you want to start a whole fight on your hands? They're quite quiet at the moment to say that they defiled the body of their teacher. Boy, let's push him around a bit. Omelo, Yomru, Rab and Doc, do you want them to say they pushed the Rebbe around? Pischule Bobo, they open the gate, Nofik, and he exited. And of course, now he jumps out the coffin and he goes to visit Vespasian. When he got to where Vespasian was encamped, Omar, he said, Shama Alech Malka, Shama Alech Malka. Shalom Aleichem, welcome King, or perhaps more correctly, Emperor, since we're dealing with the Romans. Welcome, Emperor. Omale, Vespasian responded to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Vichavet trei katalo. You deserve death twice over, Chantalav Malka, and once I am not the emperor of Korkoriously Malka, and you have the temerity to refer to me as the emperor. Vasu, and furthermore, I Malka Anor, if I am the emperor, Adol Idna Amai Lo Asis Gaboy, then you should have come and paid me homage sooner, and you didn't. Amalei. So Vespasian responded, Kada Amatlav Malka Anor, with respect to the fact you said I am not the emperor. Ibra Malka At, you are yet the emperor in waiting. Did love Malkaat? Because if you, and this is why I brought this little section for you to read, because if you were not a king or the emperor, Loi Mimsara Yerushalayim Biodoch, Jerusalem would not be handed into your hand, it would not be passed to you. As the verse says, and he quotes verses to say that ultimately Jerusalem will fall only to a king. But in the 10th chapter of Isaiah, literally the Lebanon will fall by the mighty. But Lebanon does not mean the place to the north of Israel. It's a poetic image for the temple. Ein Adir, so that the Levono means the temple, and Adir, as the rest of the text here, means a king. So I'm going to move forward to into the text of the second page. I'm just going to scroll down a bit. Then as the exchange continues. So Vespasian does not kill Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he's intrigued. And as for your question, says Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and now he starts to get to the point, and he uses Vespasian's question as an entree to a conversation about the situation in the siege. And about what you said, Vespasian, if I'm the emperor, why didn't you come and visit me till now? The Birionim, remember these Birionim, the fanatics led by Abba Sikra, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's nephew, they wouldn't let me. And it was a big business to get out. Omalei. Vespasian said to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Ilu chovis shel devash v'dorkan korach oleha, if there was a barrel of honey with a snake wrapped around it, lo hoya shoven as a chovis bishvil dorkan, would they break the jar to get rid of the snake? Ishtik, he was quiet. And obviously this was a parable. Vespasian was really offering to get rid of the snake, as it were, the Birionim who were choking the city, to possibly allow some kind of negotiation or treaty between the Romans. But yet he was quiet. For some reason, at this moment, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai didn't know what to say. Rav Yosef, at that moment, Rav Yosef, who's now reflecting the Gemara's much, much later, Rav Yosef, and some say Rabbi Akiva, who was a little later, in the 130s, the ability of the sages to reply has failed them or moved backwards. The Datom Yisokel, and their sense has become silly. Because because Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai should have said Shaklin Tavsa v'Shaklin lay Darkon v'Katlin lay. He should have said, take a tongs and remove and kill the snake v'Chavisa Shavkinin law and leave the barrel, which would have been in the parable, to ask Vespasian to help get rid of the Birionim in order for the rest of the city to make peace with the Romans, but he didn't. While they were speaking, a messenger came from Rome, Omalei, and said, address Vespasian, come arise to Nisle, Kiza, because the emperor has died. And the nobles of Rome have decided they've elected you the emperor. And so Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's prediction becomes true. So then there's a lengthy piece which I've omitted, and I want you to see this part before we actually read a little bit about the destruction itself. Omalei. So Vespasian is very impressed with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he addresses him. I've got to go back to Rome now. And they're going to send another man to lead the siege here, who will replace me. But in the meantime, as it were, ask me something I can give to you. I'll give you a wish. What do you want? And as a parting gesture, I will give you a gift. Omalei. He said, and this phrase is without question one of the most famous and most well-known phrases in the entire Talmudic literature, perhaps in the entire classical Jewish literature. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to Vespasian, Tain li Yavne v'chachomerho. Give me Yavne. Yavne was for some while had been the seat of Jewish life. It had decamped from Jerusalem to Yavne because of the difficulties and the political and security problems. And it was the seat and the origin of Jewish schooling, of Jewish education. He's looking now beyond what he believes there'll be the destruction, in order to preserve Jewish life. Give me Yavne and its sages, because that will enable us to perpetuate Judaism, Jewish ideas, Jewish education. And for Shilsa de Rabban Gamliel and the dynasty of the Nossi, of the leader of the Jewish people, Rabban Gamliel. And as an aside, Vasvosidim sign Leila Rabbi Tzadok, the great righteous man who fasted for years to avert the possibility of the destruction, the cure that was necessary to heal him after this fast. And in the, I'm not going to read the rest of this section, but they should have asked to save Jerusalem. And why didn't he? Because he believed that was too much, and if he asked that, he would get nothing at all. Ozel Shadra Latitus. And finally, Vespasian, they've lost Nero. Vespasian's been appointed the emperor in Rome, and Titus comes. They said about Titus, about he was so repulsive, and he did such awful things. They invoked the following: Va'omar Where is their God, the rock in whom they trusted? Such terrible things happen. They question the presence of God. This verse was applied to the wicked Titus, who blasphemed and insulted God. So what did he do? This is a family show, but I'm going to translate this anyway. He took a prostitute by the hand, and he entered the Holy of Holies. And he unrolled a Sefer Torah, he spread out a Sefer Torah, and he committed a sin upon it. It means he had intercourse with the prostitute. It's quite clear that whether this story is intended to be taken literally, we see a man who has utter contempt for the notion of the temple being a place of connection, of the notion of a spiritual world, of a relationship between God and the Jewish people, which is exemplified and amplified by the temple, because if he uses connection in a perverse way to, as it were, to reject and despise everything that was precious. The Notel Sai hasn't finished yet. Then he took a sword, the Gideres Aporoches, and he slashed the curtain that divided the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple. And a miracle occurred, and blood bubbled forth. And in his simplicity, the Talmud puts this as a euphemism. It literally means he believed he'd killed himself, but it doesn't mean that. I mean, this is a poor translation. It's not what it means. That it means the Talmud can't quite bring itself to write that he believed he'd killed God. You go in their temple, you slash the curtain, it bleeds. Oh, I've killed their God. That's what he believes. Shneimah, the verse says, and it quotes a verse to support this. So what did he do then? And he doesn't really report the destruction itself. Not at Saporofes. He took this curtain, and he turned it into a kind of container, like a basket or a big sack. And he took all of these utensils, and the ark had been concealed at the end of the first temple era, but the menorah and the gold table and the gold incense, also all the important things, and he wrapped them and he put them in a big container, and he put them aboard ship so that he could take them in triumph to his city back to Rome. And of course, you'll be familiar with the Arch of Titus, which depicts the triumphal procession when Titus returned to Rome, and people bearing the menorah and the other utensils. And so this kind of dovetails with the fact that there was then subsequently a parade in Rome. And the destruction is of the fact that the temple was set on fire and was destroyed, and many people died. That's discussed in the tractate Tanis, which deals with fasts, and it's a consequence of the conversation about Tisha B'Av, about whether it burnt mostly on the 9th or 10th and when the fast day should be. We're interested primarily in the kind of inspirational part, the fact that this is so painful, that Titus, a man, as we'll see, who is regarded as the epitome of evil, is able to go there unchallenged and defile everything that we hold dear. It's intended, however, not to make us miserable, but to make us feel inspired to recover the lost spirituality. Now, the last section I'm going to show you from this Gemara is here. Now, it's a bit of an aside, and I'll probably fill in more than is actually in the text. So he translates here as a gale. Nachshol doesn't really mean a gale. I think it's actually an early Hebrew version of Neptune. So I'm not sure what to do with that. But Neptune arises from the sea to drown him. It seems to me, he's mocking, their God only functions on water. Pharaoh came, he drowned him. Sisra, look at the 4th chapter of the book of Judges. This is the story of Sisra and Yael. Sisra, and he drowned in water. He's coming to fight me on water. Im Gibor, if he's really strong, let him ascend to dry land and fight me there. A divine voice emerged and said to him, this is a fantastic line. Evil man, son of the evil man. Ben Benoi means the spiritual and perhaps even biological inheritor of the wicked Esau, our opponent through history. You mock me. You say you need to come to dry land. I have a tiny creature in my world, and it's called a gnat, G-N-A-T, a little insect. Why is it called a little creature? So this type of gnat, apparently, things go in and nothing comes out, which means it gets bigger and bigger. Says God, as it were, ascend to dry land to Titus, and you fight with it. I'm not going to lower myself, says God, to fight with you. I mean, to show that you cannot vanquish a gnat. And you probably know the story. Allah Layabosha, he ascended to dry land, and the gnat flew up his nostril and it pecked him, drove him completely insane, and eventually he died from the pecking. What is interesting is he tried to escape justice. Ki hava komis, when he was dying, Amalahu, Titus said to those around him, Likilu alahai gavro, incinerate means cremate this man. V'livdari lekitme ashev yame, and scatter his ashes upon the seven seas. And you'll see in all of these stories, and actually some other stuff that I've cut out, certain reflections of other mythologies. So that the God of the Jews will not be able to find me and bring me to justice. And the Talmud records that, of course, that was what happened to him. And every day the ashes are gathered, reassembled, judged, burnt, and rescattered, which, of course, echoes myths in other cultures as well. Now, that's our taste of the story. If you want to read the entire text, then do consider joining me. It's also possible to join by Zoom. And please email to my short office if you are interested. And for Sunday morning, we will cover this and the other 3/4 of the text that we haven't. However, Tisha B'Av is not just for wallowing in misery and thinking about all the hatred and failures of Jewish history, which are many. It's also an opportunity for hope and thought. The Talmud, the Midrashim say that the Mashiach will be born on Tisha B'Av. Maybe he's already born on Tisha B'Av and sits outside the gates waiting for the moment. That means it's a time of healing as well as a time of introspection. And so I always finish teaching this with a related source, and this is where I'm going to end today. It will take 2 or 3 minutes. It's the very last sequence of the tractate Makos, which is unrelated, but it's talking about Rabbi Akiva and his friends. Rabbi Akiva, who died in the Bar Kokhba revolt. If the stories are to be understood about the great age in which he died, he was also alive during the destruction. Shuv Pamachot, on another occasion, Olam Yerushalayim. They were sending Rabbi Akiva and his friends to Jerusalem. When they reached Mount Scopus, where they could see the ruins of Jerusalem, they tore their garments. And when they reached the temple site, the Temple Mount, they saw a fox vermin emerging from the place of the destroyed Holy of Holies. They began to cry for Rabbi Akiva Mitzachik, but Rabbi Akiva was laughing. They said to him, why are you laughing? Why are you crying? They said to him, the place about which it writes, you must. That if a non-Kohen even approaches it, will die. It's so holy. And now vermin, foxes are running around there. We shouldn't cry. He said, that's exactly why I'm laughing. The verse says in Yeshaya, the 8th chapter of Isaiah, I bring faithful witnesses for me. Uriah HaKohen, Zechariah ben Yevarachyahu. I bring Uriah and Zechariah as witnesses to what I'm going to say in the name of God, says Isaiah. But why are Uriah and Zechariah mentioned in the same breath? Uriah b'mikdash rishon, Zechariah b'mikdash sheni. Uriah was a character from the first temple era and Zechariah from the second temple era. Elo. And this is Rabbi Akiva's point, and this perhaps is really why we still observe Tisha B'Av today. The verse, the prophet, God, makes the prophecy of Zechariah contingent on the prophecy of Uriah. What are their prophecies? But Uriah, it writes, is the prophecy of destruction in the 3rd chapter of the book of Micha. Therefore, because of your bad behavior, on account of you, Tzion Sodeh Techrash. Tzion, Zion, that means Jerusalem will be plowed over like a field, totally destroyed. That is the prophecy of destruction. But with Zechariah, it says, it's the prophecy of rebirth. Oid Yeshvu zakenim zakenois berechovis Yerushalayim. There'll come a time when once again elderly men and elderly women will sit in the streets of Jerusalem. Says Rabbi Akiva, you've got the prophecy of destruction and the prophecy of rebirth, and the eternal city. Ad shalonis kaman of Wasa shal Uriah, says Rabbi Akiva, until the prophecy of Uriah was fulfilled. I was concerned that the prophecy of Zechariah would not be fulfilled. That would never come. But now I look out over the destruction, and I see that the prophecy of Uriah has been fulfilled. Then biyodua, I know for sure that the prophecy of Zechariah will one day be fulfilled. And his friends, and this is how we should look at ourselves as well, on Tisha B'Av, when we read about this destruction and all the awful things. When they heard this, they said the following phrase to him: Akiva nichamtonu. Akiva nichamtonu. Akiva, you have comforted us. Akiva, you have comforted us. And this Tisha B'Av, as always, will be a sad, difficult day. It's also this year, I think, going to be a very hot day. And it's easy to wallow in previous and in contemporary hatred of our failings, of our inability to act in a unified way in the interests of our communities. But there's always hope, and we should leave Tisha B'Av feeling that we've been through a process of introspection, but always leaving it with hope. Have a meaningful week, a safe fast, and an inspirational opportunity on Tisha B'Av.